Hello and welcome, everyone. Maybe let's give people a few more seconds. Those of you who joined us before will hear the same thing over and over again from me, I'm afraid. But I have to repeat it because there might be some new people here. So I'm going to start with explaining how we're going to organize it today and every other day, really. So the way it works is that I give you a link and then the password, and you are able to watch the film on your own during your own time, and then you come back here to that Zoom window for Q&A. So please do not close it. But first, let me tell you that this is part of my project at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. And I am interested in what you think. So I will be sending you a survey after the retrospective is over. And you might get it a few times if you sign for a few films, but there will be a possibility to tick which ones you've seen with us, and you can send it back just once. You don't have to do it for each film separately. There will be just a few general questions, very easy ones there. And I really appreciate if you could fill in that survey for us later. But as I said, that will be sent to you after the retrospective is over, which means next week. The other thing I have to mention is that we have US license for those films, which means that you can watch them if you are in the US. If you are outside and you speak Polish, you can find them on any other website without English subtitles, on YouTube or cda.pl. Or you just Google online if you want to refresh your memories, because you probably have seen them before. Yes, so our license is just for the USA, just to make sure everybody knows that. Now, we want you to ask questions. You will be able to do it during the film. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you move your mouse, you should be able to see it. So during the film, if you have an idea or a question, you can just stop it for a minute, come to Zoom, write the question in, and then go back to the film. Or if you miss one of the subtitles because they went too fast, for example, then you can also go back a little bit. That's why we will give you a little bit more time that the film lasts. We will probably have around 1 hour and 40 minutes to watch the film, and the film itself is only 1 hour and 31 minutes. So you can have a quick break before you come back sharply at 8 to take part in our Q&A. If you have some questions that will come to your mind later, after the event is over, you can also email me. I'm gonna send my email address to the chat now. You should be able to see it. Please copy it, because after this event is finished, this whole window will disappear and you won't be able to see it again. So yeah, you can email me anytime. If you have questions about the films or about the subject, I will be more than happy to answer. I might be too busy to do it before the retrospective is over, depends what kind of question it is, but I promise I will start surely replying to those emails next week, the latest. I might reply right away, depends. So please email me, don't be shy. There are no stupid questions, there are only stupid answers. Hopefully mine won't be that, but yeah, I will do my best to answer your question. And even during the Q&A after the film, if you ask a question and I reply and you still have a following question, you can always use the Q&A to write it in. So these are the most important things about the survey, the license, and the email. Great. So let me tell you a little bit, especially if you are joining today for the first time, about the retrospective of Polish cult comedies from communist times. This retrospective is connected with my research about humor as a tool of resistance or fight against the regime. Various academics of the field of humor studies disagree if that is the case, or if it's only a peaceful protest or merely a safety valve. But according to relief theory of humor, humor can play a therapeutic and cathartic role in our lives. And Sigmund Freud believed that it allows people to express their forbidden thoughts, and therefore is a coping mechanism. And because in Soviet bloc, the laughter was giving people the feeling of freedom and helping their integration and bond forming, we now believe that it also helped them to organize and fight the regime in real life outside the cinema. So let's talk a little bit about this film that we are going to watch today. This film is by Stanisław Bareja. I talked about the director himself a little bit more yesterday because we are showing 4 of his films. He is the master of comedy of the 70s and of the late communist times. As I mentioned before the 70s, making films that were making fun of the system was not possible. First, we had around a decade of terror during Stalin life and governance. After that, every decade, it was the system was weaker, and it was easier and easier to make this kind of films. So it was only the Cruz, the first one, that started to make fun of the communist regime and the authority and the power and different mechanisms. So today's film by Bareja is about the housing legal system and problems that Polish people had since the war with apartments. During the war, a big part of Warsaw was completely destroyed. The rest of the country also suffered a lot. So housing was a big problem. Then obviously there were new houses being built, but as you will see in this film in a minute, they were not the best quality. There were apartment blocks. So the idea was now that everybody deserves the same kind of apartment. Everybody is equal. So no houses as such, you know, separate houses, but apartments block were the place where a communist new superhuman was supposed to live his life. And the idea about those blocks was that they would mix every level of the society. So you would have intelligentsia together with workers, physical workers, and even peasants who were coming from the countryside to join different jobs in the capital. But it was all like this all around the country in every city. Here we watch Warsaw, and all Bareja films are happening in Warsaw, his city of birth. There's a very interesting thing in this film that shows how intelligentsia and intelligence were suffering in that system, because they were usually trying to live their life in a moral way, follow the rules, and it was usually the less educated people who were making a career just because they were party members that would really take advantage of them. And this film will be about that, exactly, about one person taking advantage of the other who cannot really help because the law is not on his way, on his side, even though it should be. So there will be a lot of absurd situation there happening. Let me talk a little bit about the title this time, because this title provided a lot of problems for everybody, starting with the fact that the original title of the film was supposed to be Lavina, which in English is avalanche, like snow avalanche, right? Because of the different situations and things happening one after another. That's why the title was originally like that. In the end, the title was changed, and the Polish title now is Nie ma róży bez ognia, which literally translated would mean there is no rose without fire. Now, that obviously doesn't make any sense. The director and co-writer of the script, Jacek Federowicz, both thought that it's a very good title because it's surreal and exactly portrays what this film is all about. It's obviously a mixture of two sayings. There is no rose without a thorn, and there is no smoke without fire. But they are put together into there is no rose without fire, right? So you will maybe understand better where it comes from, why this title is there after you watch the film. And my question to you this time, today for the first time, I will have a question for you, will be why the title is There Is No Rose Without Fire. But let's talk about the English translation now. So they didn't want to translate it like that because, well, that just doesn't make any sense, right? So the translation that's more often used in English language literature is a book of jungle regulations, right? The one that we used on our website. However, the translation that we've got from the distributor, it's actually titled No Place Like Home. So don't be surprised when you start watching the film and you will see the title No Place Like Home, which is a very clever wordplay, really, right? Because in original it was There Is No Rose Without Fire. We know it's about housing and houses and home. So No Place Like Home really works as well, to be honest. But that is not, keep in mind, that is not the original title that the director gave. This film is the only one that really provides problems with the title. The rest of them is translated more or less literally. So that is the title thing. Now, let's talk a little bit about the film itself. As usual, and as always, the director and the comedian Jacek Federowicz, they both had to write the script first. It was their third script together, but only two of them were released, the one we watched yesterday and this one. So then the officials will look at the script, decide what they don't like. Some of the scenes were cut off already in the script, it didn't appear in the film. Then when they agree to let them film it, after the film is finished, they watch it again, and then they decide if the film should be released or not, which scenes should be cut off by the censors, etc. Barea was usually quite lucky in a way because he was not treated seriously. His films were stupid comedies, as there was a saying back then. He was not appreciated until much later, when he, practically after his death and the change of the system, people started to appreciate him more. And if he lived in a normal system, he would be probably a millionaire, because his films attract to cinemas much more people than films by Kieślowski or Wajda or any other Polish director famous around the world. Unfortunately for him, because the system of points given to each film was based on the artistic measures more than entertainment, he would always get a low amount of points, which meant that he would not get a lot of money. Now the country, the Polish country, would gain a lot of money from those films. This one, for example, attracted 3 million people, and it was also shown in 9 other countries around the world. Well, mostly in communist countries, right? But you can imagine that, yeah, they received a lot of money back, and they didn't pay him that much, because what he was getting was not based on how many tickets were sold, but on this decision of the committee who watched the film and decides, you know, how much it's worth. Just like the whoever watched the film yesterday will recognize that idea, maybe, because it was a similar case with the painting of the artist. One person or a small amount of people decides how much it's worth, not based on the artistic qualities at all. So Barea, yeah, was very, very popular during the time, because his films were light, funny, and making fun of the system more and more with each of them. So the next two we're gonna watch tomorrow will be even more bitter. The co-writer of the scripts will change, and then you will see the difference, because here it's more like a burlesque. Federowicz, who plays the main role in this film, is a little bit like Harold Lloyd. There is a lot of equilibristic scenes and things like that. He was actually supposed to play Marysia, the protagonist of the film we watched yesterday. He co-wrote the script, and he wanted to play the main role, but unfortunately his facial hair was growing too fast, and because of that they decided that it's not a good idea. He would have to shave too often. It was growing too fast for them to keep up. So another actor was chosen for that role instead. But here you can see that he was very, very talented, not only as a script writer, comedian, but also as an actor. He was very famous during the Solidarity time later, because he would write very funny text, or even started to record cassettes, not video cassettes, regular ones, just a recording of his voice. And then they would be distributed between people in the second circulation, underground circulation. I remember personally very, very funny programs that he was recording about Mr. Colleague, manager. It's hard to translate, kolega kierownik. So yeah, they were always very funny, making fun of the system, and that's what he wanted to do. He didn't want to make films who would laugh with the system, but at the system. So here also we will see some examples of the newspeak, so-called newspeak, nowomowa, which means that the language sometimes, the language that people use is a little bit unnatural. That was the way of speaking in official propaganda cinema. So here they make fun of it. Some of it might get lost in translation, but I think you will be able to see a lot of comical and comedies in this film, comical scenes and comedies in this film, because there's a lot of situational humor as well. And also you will see obviously that the whole film is more and more surreal in a way, a little bit. So I will talk more about it after the film is over. I want to give you enough time to be able to watch it in peace and then maybe come back if you need to. But please remember that I will ask you, and then you can answer in chat or Q&A box, why the title is "There is no rose without fire." Maybe we can even have a contest and give somebody an award at the end. We'll see. So keep that in mind while you're watching. I will now send to you the link for the film. It will open, you click on it and it will open in another program, and then you will need the password, which I'm also sending to you right now. Please go to that window, watch it, and then come back here to take part in Q&A. If you have a question during the film, then you can always stop the film, as I mentioned, and write the question here. So this way I will see it beforehand, or right after the film is finished, before the Q&A starts. And then, yeah, please come back in exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes. And that's where we will start our Q&A. Okay, thank you. Enjoy the film. So welcome back after the film. I hope you enjoyed it. The whole idea was based, obviously, of this film on the laws and bureaucracy, because as we find out earlier, it was easier to do something in such situation with somebody who was not invited to your house. You could get rid of him, but later with the bureaucracy growing bigger and bigger, it was harder and harder. We actually have seen in the film yesterday a similar situation. If you remember, those of you who've seen it, the first family that hired our protagonist, Marysia, well, played by a man called, oh, I forgot his name now even, but yeah, playing to be Marysia, a woman. That married couple didn't want to give her the registration of residence, because last time they did that, I mean, gave the registration of residence to the maid they hired, she just, you know, refused to move out. And the law was on her side. So the moment you would register somebody in your house, you were not able to get rid of them. And in this case, in this film, it was the ex-husband of the first wife. He was attached to her. Wherever she would move, he could move in with her. Because they were living in a very small place, he found some other thing to do at that time. He was away, but he kept in touch because he knew the law. He knew all the regulations, and he was very good in using them for his own gain. So what he was doing, as we find out at the very beginning of the film, he would just send a postcard to his wife every 6 months to prove, because she had to sign for it, that he's in touch. So that he didn't disappear in the unknown direction, as the law says. Because only then they could get rid of him. Otherwise, wherever they would move, he would move with them. And that's what happened. They changed or exchanged the housing with a man who was pretending. We could see from the very first moment when he appears that he is pretending that he was born in that house, used to live there, and he is very sentimental about it. He didn't even know the next door is a bathroom, not another room. So yeah, he wanted to cheat them because he knew, probably from other sources, for sure he knew, that the offices that were taking other rooms in that house will have to move soon. And he knew that he will be able to keep the whole house for himself. So that's why he promised them a new apartment in a new building. And as you could see, the new building apartments just finished were usually not very perfect. We find out that the same key is given to all tenants. So the one key would work for all the doors. So you have to change your lock first, then you have to call an electrician to come. So everything is in its big mess, right? Nothing is ready. And that shows exactly what the housing situation back then was. Nobody cared because everything was everybody's. They treated it as nobody's, right? If it's not mine or yours, it's nobody's. It's the government's. So the workers would not really work very well. As I told you yesterday, it didn't matter if you were sitting or lying down, you would get your money. The government was hiring you. There was no jobless people. There was no homeless people. But the way that worked, the housing situation was that a lot of people would be very often just crowded together, just like we could see in this film, because of this registration of residence. That's the very important thing that we have to mention here, because that doesn't exist here, right? So wherever you live somewhere, first of all, you would have your ID. They were talking about IDs all the time here. That would be, sometimes people call it internal or national passport. That is something that you need. You should have it with you at all times. During communist times, you had to have this kind of ID with you, and you had to have an address in that ID. So whenever you were born, you would get the registration of residence with your parents, and then whenever you move, you would have to go to that office and change your address. So it's not like here that you prove that you live somewhere just by getting an email with your address on it from a bank, for example, right? That's a proof already. No, in Poland, you had to have the registration card with the registration of residence. And once you give somebody a registration of residence into your place, as we see in this film, you cannot get rid of them until they move out themselves. So in this film, they in the end disappeared because they thought it's only one room left and they didn't all want to live there except for the husband. So we kind of have a happy ending there until the last moment when we find out that he's still there. And we know that it's probably going to start from the beginning all over again and bring the poor Janek, our protagonist, into the mental institution, unless he learned something. Because when you look at it, almost every problem after, except for the ex-husband of his wife, okay, here he didn't make any mistakes, but after that, it was actually him who was trying to be smart, like the other guy is, right? But he would just make mistake after mistake, and he was putting them into more and more trouble. His ex-wife's new wife, who lived in a different city, didn't know where he was. He found her, he brought her, and then he gave her the registration of residence. Obviously, he hoped that this lady and her boyfriend will get rid of his ex-husband, his current wife ex-husband. It's very complicated, right? but by giving them the registration, he actually fulfilled the promise. So yeah, the whole thing was actually, if you look at it, his own thought. So before I start answering the questions, I would like to find out if you have any ideas why the title is There is no rose without fire. Did that appear again in the film? Or when did you hear it again, or saw it written down? What are your ideas? Anyone? Because there is a scene, right? There is a scene in which the militia, member of militia comes, and he actually says that, right? Okay, so we do have two people who said the guy was burning down his house. That is true. That is one thing that, yeah, you are getting close. So the father of Lucia, and Lucia is the protagonist, current wife, ex-husband, second new wife, and her father burned his house. Now, why did he burn his house? What was his job? What was he doing there? Oh, okay, so the same person, Kasia, says to grow roses. Yes, so he burned down his house to grow roses there in the place of the house. Why? And also we have, is it to signify you have to ruin something to find something better? Well, as I mentioned before, it comes from two different sayings. There is no rose without a thorn. There is no smoke without a fire, put together by this militia guy who actually just made a mistake, right? He knew both of them. That's the example of newspeak in a way. Like people are trying to say something clever using that language, and they say something that makes no sense. So that's exactly what he did, right? He said that, they tried to correct him. The other guy was even saying that makes no sense, you know. But the whole idea here was about the father of Lucia. So he was growing roses, he was selling them, which means and shows that he had a private business. Now that was unusual because, as we said before, almost everything was government related or owned in communism. Now, there were some loopholes and there were some people who could have their own business, but the government was making it very hard for them. They didn't want that. They didn't want to help them. They want to have control over everybody. So this guy burned his house to get money from insurance. And then to get more money to be able to buy new house, new greenhouse for the roses, and then also to buy an apartment for his daughter. So in this case, in a way, this title starts to get the meaning and make sense. There's no rose without fire. So he has to start the fire, burn everything down to grow the roses and to have the roses to sell, right? So Kasia is our winner today. I will write down your name and I will email you, okay? Great job. Yeah, okay, great. So let me look at the Q&A right now and let's start with questions. Here, the first one is not a question, it's a statement. Maybe you should mention what intelligentsia is. Okay, so intelligentsia is group of like social group of people who are educated in this kind of jobs like teacher, doctor. So they have very specific responsibilities, and they have to study to be able to do their job. They usually don't earn too much. In communist system, they were appreciated, but not with money. We knew that they are very important, but they would not earn a lot. So, but they were usually, as I said, they usually had like a honor code, and they would follow that code and try to play by the rules. And here we see that our protagonist, Janek, he is losing. Every time he's losing because he doesn't know how to do the dealing and wheeling. Or wheel and deal. and how to cheat, right? So everybody is cheating him. First Malinowski, this gentleman who shows up and proposed to exchange the apartments, and then his wife's ex-husband, who's using him all the time. But as I say, it's also that he himself, whenever he's trying to cheat or be clever and try to so his thinking is correct. He's an intelligent person, right? So whenever he thinks of some solution, it makes sense on paper, in theory, but in practice, he's always used by others, and yeah, his idea doesn't usually work. It's somebody else's who gains from it. So yeah, intelligentsia, I hope I explained, it's educated people, not workers, no, not physical workers or peasant farmers. So it will be also like all people working in offices. That would be intelligentsia. Okay, the second thing we have here is, I was very reminded of the lack of intimacy that Cuban families have. Sometimes up to 3 and 4 generations live together. In Cuba, the housing situation is very difficult. How different is it today in Poland? Well, it did change, but there is one thing I have to mention. There is, it's in, oh, I missed the word right now, but it's a normal thing to have a whole family living together, like 3 generations of family living together, not because they have to, but because of our mentality and the way people think that they should take care of their grandfather, for example. So there will be a grandmother or grandparents living together with the parents and with the children. Especially that usually when you have small children, your grandparents take care of them. You don't have to find somebody from outside and pay them. So it's like a good deal in the family. But it's also the mentality, the habits, coming maybe from the Catholic background. So a lot of families still might live together, but if they choose to, right? So back then in the communist times, the situation with the housing was very bad. And right after the war, I mentioned yesterday already, a lot of people would be put together, but not families, just different families in one house. That would be normal, right? So with time, it was theoretically getting better and better, but you would have to wait for your apartment. Just like this couple, they were saying, oh yeah, we've signed, we are on the waiting list for a new apartment, only 5 more years and we will get it, right? So yeah, you would wait 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It was getting longer and longer because the house were not built on time as it was planned. There was this 5 years plan and 10 years plan. So the government was theoretically trying to do something about it, but yeah, as with everything, there were good, ideas, but in practice, it didn't work out as usual. So right now, people usually can afford to live on their own if they want to. If the parents get older and stay alone, usually they would just live in their house. Old people houses are not very popular. It's not popular to put your parents into such institution. It usually happens only if your parents, or one or the other, is very, very ill and they have to take care of them, then you would put them in some kind of hospice. But otherwise, you usually live with your parents as long as you can, or they live on their own. So yeah, but the housing situation is better. We have more apartments now. The ones in Warsaw are very expensive though. So only people who work and earn well in Warsaw can afford them. Or if they live there because they inherited the house from generation to generation, right? But we have to remember that Poland was not hit by the 2008 crisis. And the reason probably why that happened was that in Poland, we do not have the habit of using credit cards or borrowing money from the banks. If we need money, we borrow from friends and family without interest. That's usually how it worked. That was the case during the communist time because there was no other way. And a lot of people, it's just, again, the mentality. You wouldn't go to the bank, you wouldn't trust the bank and the interests. So obviously some people do that because they have to, but it's not a common thing. That's why when the banks, all around the world had problems because of the credits, In Poland, the situation was quite good. The only thing is that, yeah, our economy, again, looks very good on paper and in theory, but in practice, we're not earning as much as other European countries. And also the prices are higher. So it's not as great as it might seem at the first look. So yeah, so just going back to that question, the situation has changed because the market has changed, right? So now if you have money, you can live wherever you want. Before, even if you had money, you needed that registration of residence. That's why there are two people in this film who have money, can afford to buy an apartment in Warsaw, but they can't because the registration of residence is another city. And you were not allowed to live in another city if you're not registered there. You were not even allowed, that's another funny situation. If you were from Warsaw, for example, and you would like to book a hotel in Warsaw, you were not allowed because in your ID, they would check that you live in Warsaw. So you cannot have a hotel for a night or even more nights, you know. Now, obviously, you can do whatever you want. So the main difference between the communist times and now, you know, there are pluses and minuses. We didn't resolve all our problems just by changing the system, but it's usually the freedom. You have more freedom, you can do whatever you want. And as we see in other films, what's very important for me, you can have your passport and go wherever you want, whenever you want. Before that was not possible. You would not own the passport. You would have to ask for it whenever you wanted to go abroad, prove you have invitation. They would either give it to you or not. And whenever you are back, you have to give it back. So yeah, that sounds crazy, but that's how it was. Okay, let's move to the next question. So, hi Anna, I believe the film is suggesting that the downstairs neighbor might be a homosexual. What do you think? Would homosexuals be featured in this era of of Polish films? Thank you. So we actually talked about homosexualism yesterday, and how it would be shown. There was a question about that yesterday, because in yesterday films, we would have a man pretending to be a woman, kissing another woman. So, you know, you could talk about lesbians in this sense here more than gay people. But yeah, both obviously homosexual. So as I mentioned before, I will repeat myself now, is that this subject was not really, it was a taboo subject. So a lot of people would say they didn't even know that something as homosexualism existed. Obviously it did exist and existed forever and before and after, you know, they just were not aware, as they say. And they said, oh, in our times that was not the case, you know, which was not the truth, obviously. Now, in this film, I do not believe that the neighbor is homosexual. He is talking about group and sex, using the German word where it came from to Poland, the idea. So group sex. So he obviously is looking for girls all the time. You can see that in every scene that he appears, more or less. And he is, he obviously is a person who would like to take part in a group sex. And he believes that his neighbors upstairs do that because there are two men and one woman who moved in, then another woman who moved in, right? And then there's more and more people. Eventually, because if you didn't miss that scene, the neighbor says to the protagonist, when they on the balconies, that they talk to each other, he says to him, we should do something together, we should organize an orgy. That's what he means, right? So next time you have some people upstairs, just let me know, knock a few times at the floor and I will come. And that's what happens at the end. Our poor protagonist is getting crazy. He starts knocking at the floor with the chair by rocking it, right? He obviously doesn't think that the neighbor will come with two girls. So he already had two girls downstairs with him. So I would say that he was rather an erotoman. You know, he was maybe bisexual. Maybe in the orgy he would be happy to have sex with either sexes, but I don't think that he was homosexual. So he was hoping that there is a party upstairs, an orgy that he can join. And that's what he told militia member before in another scene, right? That's what's happening. And he said it's not illegal. And he thought that he was helping his poor neighbor, right? By saying, oh yeah, he just has people coming over to have sex with. That wouldn't be helpful. It was not illegal because there was no law talking about anything that was not considered normal sexual orientation. You might find it funny because communism refused to accept religion, right? Religion was the opium for the masses. So Catholicism was not welcome in Poland. It survived, unlike other countries, because people just didn't let the government take over. There was a lot happening there, but in the end, we could say that Poland was always a Catholic country in a way. Like 90% of people would be Catholics and they would follow the rules. So according to that, you would have thought that if communism doesn't approve Catholicism, then it doesn't matter, or it doesn't care what the citizens do with their sexual life. But that was not the case. Remember that communism was supposed to create a new person, a superhuman, right? And that superhuman was supposed to be morally right and follow the general morality that was not religious, but human, let's say. But the idea of the communists was that just like in Catholicism, everybody has to be, behaving in the right way. The marriage was described in the law as a relationship of two people, one man, one woman. Divorces were allowed. So that was the difference, because in Catholicism, obviously, you shouldn't divorce. But otherwise, so as long as there was a relation between man and woman, they didn't care actually how many wives you have, how many men you have or whatever, at least in the eyes of law. As I said, Poland was always a very Catholic country, so especially in smaller places, villages or towns, you would still have to take care of your reputation. Everybody, knew everybody in smaller places. Religion was very important, so homosexual people, for example, would not admit that what is their sexual orientation, as I mentioned before. That only changed when the system changed. And to be honest, even now, we do have problems with that in Poland, because a very big part of the society is Catholic. So there is still a lot of people who is against homosexual marriage, for example, which is not legal in Poland. But theoretically, people go, come out of the closet. They, especially in Warsaw, artists, there is no problem with that. They are already talking about their orientation. But some people would not accept it still. So it's very, divided. The society in general is very divided, just like here and everywhere else, like right now seems like it. So I hope I answered that question in full. Okay, next one is, please explain the rules and regulations of zameldowanie. Zameldowanie is the registration of residence. I think I did already, but I think you missed it because you said that your screen was black and you couldn't hear me. So it was the way it was. Wherever you lived, you had to be registered there. In your ID, there would be the address. Whenever you change the place of residence, you would have to change that in your ID in an office. Okay, why did Dąbczak say that where you move, I will move with you, you have to take me with you? Exactly, that's why, because his ex-wife, he was attached to his ex-wife. That's probably because they were living before together, for sure. I mean, we don't know the past, but that had to be the case. So the Dąbczak, or this ex-husband, and the current wife of our protagonist, Janek, They were married, right? They moved in somewhere for sure. After you get married, you both had to get same address in the ID, wherever it is. It might be your parents' house, you might not have your own, but you will have the same address. So the moment they got the same address, they were kind of stuck with each other. So even when they get divorced, and remember in that film there is a scene when we see another guy, it's actually the actor Pokora, who was playing Marysia in yesterday's film. So he got married with a lady, but the ex-husband, who was the main tenant in the house, didn't let her give him the registration of residence, and he was kicked out of the house. So the ex-wife and ex-husband had to live together, and the new husband couldn't move in. So there was a lot of things like that. That's the crazy regulations. And as we hear in the film, with time, the bureaucracy was growing. So it was possible to get rid of the ex-husband, but it would take forever. And here we hear from Dobchak himself many times. He knows the law left and right. He knows it by heart. He knows everything, right? So he knows what to do and what not to do. He said that the only way they could get rid of him would be if he didn't keep in touch with his ex-wife for more than 6 months. And he never done that because he would always send her a postcard that she had to register that she got. She obviously didn't care. Remember, that's the very beginning. She said, throw it away, because she doesn't realize what it is. She doesn't know why her husband sends her postcards, ex-husband, every 6 months, right? Twice a year. But he knows that that gives him the right to move wherever they move. As long as they were living in one room, he preferred to live somewhere else. We know he's skilled. He surely had a better place to live before. But when they moved to a new apartment and had 2 rooms, 1 bedroom, 1 living room, then he thought, oh, this is better now. And also it's in Warsaw, and he needed registration from Warsaw because he promised it to Lucia, to this girl from another place, another city, Łomża, I believe, or maybe she was from a different one. Anyway, so yeah, he just knew what to do and how to make sure he always have a place to live. Why couldn't the original owner get rid of other people? How did they have a legal claim to live there? So he was the main tenant, and he was the only one who could give other people registration of residence. I'm sorry. So that was his right in a way, right? But once he would do that, that was it. He would lose the right, and the only way to get rid of them would be if they moved out. Just like the maid in the film yesterday, who didn't move for 5 years out. After 1 month, she left the job, but she never moved out, right? So it's exactly the same. So if he takes a decision to give them the registration, he's losing that control. And in this film, he thinks it's a good idea. He only does it when he hopes it will help him to get rid of them. He almost gets rid of Lucia and Zenek before the father comes in saying that his house is burned down, right? Obviously, he couldn't predict that. So it looks like he's just not lucky. Whenever he has a great idea, it always ends up badly. The next great idea he has is to hire a prostitute who would sleep with ex-husband of his wife, which would let Lucia to divorce him, and it would be his fault. That's very important. The divorce had to be somebody's fault, and then that person wouldn't have a right to get all the furniture and the TV set, which was the most important thing for Lucia. But that didn't work out because they sent the prostitute upstairs, not knowing that Zenek is there and not Dobchak, the guy that they were after. So again, every time he has an idea, he's trying to be clever, just like Dobchak is, and wins all the time, he is losing. So he actually asked for it himself. And that's why his wife is angry at him, because he also doesn't tell her. At the beginning, you can see he's trying things, but he doesn't tell her that he's going to try to make her ex-husband drunk to get anonymous complaints from the neighbors. So she doesn't know. And then by accident, he gets drunk and the complaints are about him, right? The next thing he does is finding the new wife of Dobchak and bringing her to their house and not telling her again, you know, so when she comes and sees half-undressed woman, she thinks that he's cheating on her. So everything, it's obviously accumulated here, right? One after another, It's like an avalanche in mountains of snow. That's exactly what's supposed to be the original title, as I mentioned. It's just getting worse and worse. And yeah, and in the end, there is a happy ending, except for the fact that Domchak is still there because they cannot get rid of him. They got rid of everybody else, but not him. And soon he will probably get more people to their new place. Not new, the old one, the house. Okay, what happened when a couple who registered together then got divorced? Well, that's the thing. So as I mentioned, when they live together, they would be both the tenants, and then it would be very hard to get rid of the other. It would take years. So it was all very complicated. And this whole comedy is based on that fact, that it was complicated, and only the person who would know how to kind of cheat the law or find the loopholes would win. Domchak in the end is even finding a mother with a child, and he does it because he knows Lucia wants to divorce him. So he gets the father rights to the child because then he can blackmail her and say that she cannot divorce him because now he has a child and she would have to pay him even more money. So he knows exactly what to do in every situation. You cannot win with him. And they are making fun of the fact that there was a lot of people like this, that people in communism would learn those skills in a way. Because to survive in communist country, you had to learn to cheat, to wheel and deal, to look for the loopholes in the law. Because if you followed the rules, you would not get anywhere, as we can see in the case of our protagonist. Now, let's have a look here. What did it mean about Jerzy's new profession? Jerzy, or Domchak, so ex-husband of our protagonist's wife. Yes, there is a scene in which he's saying, yeah, it's my job. And when Janek asks him, by the way, what is your job? What is your profession? He says, oh, well, it's a new profession. It doesn't have a name yet. Well, most likely he has no profession. His profession is exactly that, what he's doing. He's living in their house for free. He's not paying them. He even mentioned before, I need a place to stay. I cannot live on the street. And we know he's not paying. So he is very, and then, you know, he always finds a way. Remember when they move, all three of them at the very beginning to the new house, he ordered the professional person to help with the move, a guy with a big car who was supposed to help, right? This guy helps him because he hired him. So he takes 2 suitcases upstairs. Then he comes back and tells Janek that he owes him money because Mr. Domchak, ex-husband, said that he will pay, right? So he pays, and then the guy drives off, leaving with him with everything. So you can see that Domchak is really good. He really knows what to do. So he probably doesn't work at all. I'm saying probably because I did read about the script, what was his job in the script. Job is not really a right way here to call it, but yeah, he was working for this citizens militia at first in the script. In one scene, he was supposed to have, one scene was supposed to suggest that he is actually taking part in beating up the students who were protesting, that he would be part of Ormo, so-called Ormo, which was like citizens militia, we could say. So he was shown as surely a person from the party, being on the party side, being a communist himself, right? Maybe not because he believed in communism, but because you knew if you party member, life will be easier for you, you know. So just out of, I don't know the word, out of, you know, just to be more comfortable and have everything you need. So that was the idea at first when they were writing the script, but the censors didn't allow that. So in the end, there is none suggestion of what he is doing. So it leaves it to us to decide or to guess. We know that he is not a nice person, right? I mean, he is in a way nice because he is, you know, he's always nice and funny. We kind of like him in a way. Especially as the protagonist says in the end, the most funny thing is that whatever he does is legal. And it's true, because he knows what he's doing. But yeah, his job is not described here at all, but the fact that he says, yeah, it's a new profession, he doesn't have a name, give us an idea that he's either not working at all, which was not something that the communist country would allow you as well, right? He was out of the society in a way. He would just abuse and overuse everything and everybody. That was his job. He didn't have a name yet. I hope I answered that question. Okay, let me see. When I got my apartment in Warsaw in 1999, the first thing my friend told me was, never register anyone in your apartment. Now I better understand why. Okay, well, I'm glad this film helped you to understand what happened back then. Even though the law has changed since then, I believe, because the system had changed. So, because here it looks like it was after already. So yeah, I'm glad it gave you the idea. But yeah, the moment you give somebody the residency in your place, that's when the problem starts. I'm sure now it's easier because, as we said, the problem was the bureaucracy. Now you have a working legal system. You have lawyers, right? Before, everybody was working for the government, for the party, for the communists, the lawyers, the judges, everyone. Now everybody is independent. So if you have money, you can hire a lawyer, and you can hire the best lawyer who will surely win your case. So I think that has changed. Let me look now in the chat box, because people were writing here. Just a second. Okay, there are not questions. They are rather comments, I would say. So I hope I explained well the part of the housing problems. The next film that we will watch tomorrow will be more about the shortages, because here we are at the beginning of 70s still, right? The next one will be already in the middle of 70s, and the one after the end of 70s. Actually, even 1980 was made in the end of 70s, but released in 1980. So there will be more and more things showed in sense of the fact that there was nothing in the shops. Because the 70s at the beginning were good. We had a new party leader, Gierek, who had a great idea, because obviously communist economy was not working. So what did he do? He started borrowing money from the West. And that was working very well at the beginning. So we start having everything. There was no shortage of many things like food. But that didn't last, because how long can you borrow without giving back, right? Yeah, the people who do feel nostalgia, remember I mentioned yesterday, it's nostalgia for the communist times, are usually talking about the beginning of 70s. They say, oh yeah, that was the best time when we had Gierek, because he took care of everything. There was no jobless, no homeless people. Because everybody was put somewhere, given an address. You had to have an address. It might be just very crowded where you live and you couldn't get out, right? Just like here. You would have a job. You didn't have to do anything in that job, or not much. Here we have a scene when Zenek, who broke the door, has to get and find new door. He goes to the construction site of a new building next door. He just comes in, takes the door. The security guy just smiles, right? I mean, his work is supposed to be stop people from, stealing from that construction site, but that was exactly what was happening. Everybody was stealing everything, because everything was nobody's. So he lets Zenek take the door, doesn't stop him at all. So you might remember that scene, that you might think that what's going on here, right? He just got another door because it was all the same. They fit, obviously, but then they had to change the lock because there was a new lock from another building. So this whole another building would have the same locks for everybody as well. But I added later, as I mentioned yesterday, the TV series called 4 Alternatives about the tenants block, in which we see even more problems that were connected with living in the apartment block built in the 60s or 70s. Mostly 70s, because that was also Gierek era. He would build a lot of new apartment blocks in the south of Warsaw. It was even called the bedroom of Warsaw, because a lot of people from outside Warsaw would move in there and start working in this capital, but they had really problems to get to the city center because, you know, there was no roads. They would open the blocks but not provide the transport. So later there would be buses who would be always very crowded. Now we do have an underground system that goes there, and it's really part of Warsaw now. Okay, so if you have no more questions, and I do not see any more here, then I will just invite you to join me again tomorrow. So tomorrow film will be a little bit different, because even though it's still Stanisław Bareja who's directing, Stanisław Tym is now co-writer, and he was in this film. He was playing Zenek, the guy who had to go to the restroom all the time for unknown reason. So if you remember him, he's Lucia's boyfriend who needed a registration of residence in Warsaw to get the job he wanted. So he will write the next two scripts with the director, and he will be playing smaller role in the first one and bigger in the second. And here the satire will be a little bit different. So this was a burlesque, a lot of situational humor. Tomorrow and after tomorrow will be a little bit different. After that, we have a rom-com from a different director who did a lot of more social comedies and romantic comedies. But this one we chose because it shows also the system and the humor, how humor can fight with it. And then the last two films that we will show by Juliusz Machulski are the most modern ones. They were made in the 80s, and they are like Hollywood kind of films. He was actually in Hollywood talking to producers who wanted to buy some rights to his films. That never happened, because Hollywood producers buy rights but then don't make the films. But they wanted to make remakes of his films. He made many great comedies. Everybody who's Polish will know Machulski and his films. He made many more before and after, but again, they were not talking about the system. The first one was Babank, and it was about the Poland between the wars. So even though it was a huge success, we couldn't show it here. We show in Sex Mission and King Size only. And after the system change in the 90s, he continued to make films very successfully, especially Killer and Killer 2. But they were making not fun of the new system. Now they were making fun of human mentality and more like social problems. So that's the difference between comedies during the communism and after. Okay, I think we will finish for today because nobody added any other questions. Thank you very much for joining, and I really hope that I will see you or see that you're here again this week. Thank you very much.